Stewart's the Department of Wildlife.
This is Lori Walsh from the Sea Life Aquarium.
This is Nina Kogut, also from the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Hawk Rosales here from the Intertribal Sinkyone Wilderness Council. I'm Executive Director of that organization here in Mendocino County, consortium of 10 federally recognized California Indian tribes.
Hi, this is Cara O'Brien. I'm with California State Parks and the Seabird Protection Network.
Okay, I think that is everybody. Did we miss anyone?
Yeah, hi, this is Russ Mall. I'm a former California Sea Grant Director.
And hi, everyone. Mike, I'll just introduce myself more specifically. I'm Dev Ayama. I'm the community manager for the IUCN Green List with IUCN's Global Protected Areas program based here in Switzerland in our headquarters.
Great, thanks everybody. And I just wanted to speak briefly for two folks who can't be on the call. We have Haley Batista from Northern Chumash, and we also have Dick Ogg, who's a commercial fisherman out of Bodega Bay. So those guys couldn't make the call today, but they will be participating in this group. So thanks everybody for those introductions. I think at this point I'll hand it over to Dev for a brief introduction on what IUCN is and what the Green List is.
Well, I might just introduce myself quickly, Mike. This is Matt.
Oh yeah, sorry Matt, go ahead.
No problem. Matt Durnan. I'm with Accreditation Services International. I'm the reviewer for the IUCN Green List for California and Asia, and based out of Oregon at the moment.
Great, thanks, Mike. Just also for everyone to note, we're recording this webinar just so that for the EAGL members that aren't able to make it, they'll be able to listen into this recording. Just once again to reiterate, IUCN, from IUCN side, we're really excited about California joining the IUCN Green List program, and we're really grateful to all of you individual EAGL members for taking the time to send in your applications, and to your organizations for allowing you the time to volunteer your expertise in this evaluation group exercise. By way of a very quick agenda, in this webinar, we'll cover a little bit about IUCN, just for some of you that may be new to the organization, and then we'll spend some time giving an overview of the Green List, and there'll be some time for questions and discussion, and then we'll switch it to Matt to give us a quick overview of the training and specifically what's going to be covered in the 2 days next week, of which you have a draft agenda. And then hopefully there should be some time for Q&A. Mike, I thought we could hear very briefly from OPC or California in terms of why you wanted to join the Green List, but we could do that either here or later on. I just have this one slide in case you want to speak to it now or later.
Sure. I think Tova and I can speak to it briefly from OPC's perspective, and then we'll hand it over to Becky and Steve from the department for their perspective. But really, we see two main goals with this effort. The first, to amplify the involvement of a variety of stakeholders in the MPA management program. So we've noticed that, since implementation, MPAs have kind of, a lot of folks aren't aware necessarily of all the management efforts that the state is conducting in terms of MPAs, and we feel that there's kind of been a drift away from MPAs in terms of certain stakeholder groups. And we want to really try to emphasize that, these are these are for us as Californians, and we want to bring as many different ocean sectors back into the MPA management world as possible. So we feel that this is a great opportunity, with a group that's this size, that has so much diversity of representation. We think that this is going to be a great start. And the other thing is just bringing more international recognition for our achievements in sustainable ocean management. I think from the state's perspective, California's MPA network is globally significant in terms of its size, the scale, the scientific guidelines, and the stakeholder input that went into the design of this thing, and the approach that we're trying to use to manage these MPAs in a way that that really does work as much as we can for everybody. We think that bringing California's MPAs to the global stage is going to help to build support for ongoing best management practices here, and also serve as a good check for the state to make sure that we are meeting the goals of the Marine Life Protection Act, which is the founding legislation for these marine protected areas. So yeah, amplifying stakeholder involvement and bringing more international recognition are really our two goals. Becky and Steve, do you guys have anything to add from the Department of Fish and Wildlife perspective?
No, that's our list as well. I think this is Becky Yoda. I think I would only add that, the Department of Fish and Wildlife is looking forward to the feedback from you all on the EAGL. Yet again, the more we can learn, this is an adaptive management process, the more we can learn about how things are going, how the evaluation is that you provide, so that we can look to see where we can improve, where we might change things up, how we might go forward in some ways. So we're anxious for all of that feedback, and this is an opportunity in a very interesting and cohesive way to get that information from you. Not that we can't go to you directly, but this is another way for us to learn how things are going and how we're doing. And that's the only thing I would add to what OPC just mentioned. Steve, do you have anything else?
I think everyone's hit on it. As you all probably on the phone know, it's the largest scientific design network of marine protected areas in North America, and it was basically a huge, driven by stakeholders. And it's great to see you all step up and take your time to evaluate California's MPAs to see if we are complying and meeting the standards of the green list. So it's very exciting for California, and I believe we are the first network to be marine network to be evaluated through this program. So I just want to say I appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedules, and look forward to meeting you all as we take on this task and move forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. And you're right, Steve. It is the first network of sites. We have had marine protected areas in the pilot phase of the green list, but this is going to be the first application across an entire network of sites. So I'll quickly give you an idea of the institution of IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, before we get into the overview of the Green List program itself. And IUCN is actually celebrating its 70th year, so we're one of the oldest environmental organizations in the world, having started it in 1948. Just a flag, in case anyone's dialing by phone, there is a shared screen that hopefully is visible to everyone. We also are the world's largest environmental network, and we're called a union because we are a union of governmental and non-governmental members. And we have over 1,300 member organizations. These consist of state governments and government agencies, non-governmental organizations, and indigenous peoples organizations. We also have 6 commissions, of which you all are familiar and have heard from now about the World Commission on Protected Areas, that's WCPA. But we also have other commissions related to species conservation, that's the Commission that provides the science behind the IUCN Red List of threatened species. There's also commissions on ecosystem management, environmental law, social policy, and education and communication. And the third strand of IUCN's DNA is the Secretariat, of which I'm part of, and that's about 1,000 staff spread out around the world in over 50 countries. I just thought I'd flag that in the US we have 119 members. That's 6 government members at the federal level, so at the state level, but also Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, NOAA, USAID, and US Department of Agriculture. Non-governmental members the number of non-governmental members is 110, and 3 indigenous peoples organizations. A lot of our work is focused, of course, on conservation action in the field related to species conservation, protected area management, but also around policy influencing and bringing in the best and objective science into national and international policy. Just to give you a quick scan of some of the major areas that we work in. I sit within the Protected Areas Program. We also work with World Heritage Sites, but also on other topics such as water, species conservation I mentioned, forest, climate change, various other topics around conservation and environmental sustainability more broadly. As an institution, as I mentioned, we work a lot on international policy and helping our members contribute to and achieve global sustainability targets, specifically and importantly related to biodiversity targets, the one most directly related to nature conservation. And this is under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, but also increasingly working on the Paris Agreement around climate change, mitigation and adaptation targets, and the role that nature can play in contributing to climate change mitigation and adaptation. IUCN works in 3 strategic areas. Our heartland work is around valuing and conserving nature. This is where our Red List work is. Our Greenness work sits in here as well. So species conservation, protected area management, but also we work in promoting and supporting effective and equitable governance of natural resources. So making sure that not just nature is benefiting from conservation, but also that this is benefiting communities that are dependent on these natural resources. And the third area is around deploying nature-based solutions to address societal challenges. So promoting the role of nature to some of our challenges around achieving or increasing water security, increasing food security, and climate change, as I mentioned earlier. And increasingly, we are framing our work in the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the ones that are most directly relevant are the ones related to biodiversity, that's 14 and 15, life on land and life below water. But there are many other goals that are also relevant to IUCN strategic areas, which are listed here. So I mentioned we have a global presence. We're headquartered here in Switzerland, and we have 11 regional offices that serve as regional hubs. And then we have country and project offices in over 50 countries around the world. If you'd like more information about IUCN, please check out our website and our social media channels. Okay, so moving into the Green List itself, I'll give you some background in terms of IUCN's mission for the Green List and where it's coming from, the objectives of the Green List program, a quick overview of the Green List standards, and a quick summary of the implementation process and how the whole Green List program is governed. Apologies if some of you did attend the webinars that we organized when the call for EAGL applications was open. There will be some repeated material here, but hopefully it'll be a good refresher for all of you before the training next week. Through the presentation, there'll be some images of green list sites that were part of the pilot phase around the world, and this was actually the first green listed site in the world, which is found in Australia, Arakwal National Park. It's a park managed jointly by the New South Wales Parks Department in collaboration with the Arakwal Aboriginal community. So it's a shared governance system, and the Greenness logo actually is inspired by some Aboriginal art from the Arakwal community in this region. So some of you may be familiar within the UN's Convention on Biological Diversity, the target that most specifically relates to protected areas is IUC Target 11, which establishes some goals by 2020 of proportions of protected areas globally. So 17% and 10% are the global targets for terrestrial and coastal and marine areas. But what's often not emphasized is the second part of this target is that these areas are conserved through effectively and equitably managed, ecologically represented, and well connected systems of, sorry, I'm just dealing with a technical issue here. Systems of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. So generally, the world is on track for meeting the 17% and 10% targets. If you look at some of these recent numbers in terms of protected area coverage, we're at about 15% of terrestrial and over 10% of marine globally, although we do have some ways to go in terms of global ocean protection. But when you look at the studies in terms of how these areas are being managed, only about, based on a recent study that sampled a few thousand protected areas around the world, only about 24 to 25% of these protected areas are actually meeting sound management principles. And this is exactly where the Greenness program comes in and is trying to address the second half of this target that's critically important if we want these areas to be protected effectively and successfully for the benefit of nature and communities. So in the last CBD Conference of Parties, which was in 2016 in Mexico, there was an official recognition of the Greenness program by Conference of Parties to promote the IUCN Green List as a voluntary program to improve management effectiveness in protected areas around the world. So as I mentioned, the Greenness program sits within the heartland work of valuing and conserving nature, but it also very much connects to the work around governance of natural resources, as well as the role of promoting nature-based solutions. So the role that protected areas can play in addressing societal challenges such as climate change mitigation and adaptation. For IUCN and for the World Commission on Protected Areas, the Greenness program also is framed by the promise of Sydney. This was a commitment that emerged out of the last World Parks Congress in 2014 in Sydney, which was really about positioning parks to be providing and inspiring solutions for sustainability challenges for the planet that nature's facing, but also for communities. And the Greenness program really focuses on the parks part of this promise, whereby IUCN wants to recognize and demonstrate successfully and well-managed protected areas or protected area networks, but also increase and build capacity and encourage more protected areas to commit to improving conservation performance and equitable governance of these areas. And that's where the mission of the Greenness Program is to increase and recognize the number of protected and conserved areas globally that are fairly governed, effectively managed, and achieving their conservation outcomes. So there's equal emphasis on recognition, but also on increasing. So we also promote the Greenness Program as a program to build capacity in areas that are interested in applying some of IUCN's tools or other relevant tools that would be aligned with IUCN best practice. The Green List program also applies to conserved areas. So these could be community conserved areas or areas managed by indigenous communities or areas that are not necessarily legally protected, but have conservation as one of their main objectives. So the program ultimately is trying to answer these questions in the context of protected and conserved areas. What are the values that are being identified and protected? Where are these values located? For whom are these values being protected? By whom? How are they being protected? And ultimately, are these values being conserved? And are they being conserved in a fair way that benefits both nature and communities? So 3 underlying objectives to the program. At the heart of the program is the Green List standard, and to ensure that this global standard provides a suitable mechanism and measure for strengthening and recognizing successful area-based conservation outcomes. Secondly, that the program itself provides a globally accessible channel for conservation capacity development through a global to local community of protected area and conserved area practitioners. So by making commitments to the Green List program, there's also a commitment to joining a global community of practitioners that are interested in raising the bar and conservation performance in protected areas around the world. And thirdly, that this can then unlock collaboration and further investment across this community for the improvement of management performance and governance in these areas. So the Green List, as I mentioned, at the heart of the Green List program is a sustainability standard that has 4 components. The first component is good governance, the second component is sound design and planning, and the third component is around effective management. These are the 3 foundational components which, if put together, will give rise to the 4th component, which is successful conservation outcomes. And I'll give you a quick overview of the standard on the next slide, but just by way of a quick background, the Green List program kicked off at the World Conservation Congress in 2012, and in 2014 at the World Parks Congress, 25 sites were admitted to the Green List in a pilot phase of the Green List program. And this just gives you an idea of the global reach of the pilot phase in different regions around the world. Between 2014 and 2016, the program also applied some codes of good practice for standard setting. So the ICL Alliance is an organization that establishes good practice for standard setting to ensure that a standard system is following good practice for stakeholder inclusion, for instance, and applying the most objective, transparent, and accountable means and processes for standard implementation. So we now have a version 1.1 of the standard accompanied by a user manual, and you will get much more familiar with these documents during the course of the training. There's also an information management system. We use a cloud-based platform through salesforce.org that is the mechanism through which sites, and in this case it would be networks of sites, upload information that then is available instantaneously to the EAGL for evaluation, and the public portal of information. So green listed sites are featured on the World Database on Protected Areas, that's WDPA, which is found on protectedplanet.net. And a summary and a snapshot of why these sites are green listed is available, will be made available on this publicly accessible website. Okay, so I mentioned the four components at the top are what frame the standard. This is a quick overview of the standard. The standard itself is 17 criteria, or you can think of the criteria as conditions that sites are required to meet in order to achieve the green list. And in order to achieve the green list, all 17 criteria need to be met. So sites that may be performing well on conservation outcomes, but performing less well on governance, won't be able to achieve green list status until they've improved against all four components. So you'll see, you get an idea of the components and the criteria. These are just the titles of the 17 criteria, and there's more detailed narrative text that explains the conditions in the standard. The standard is a means by which IUCN is also applying some of our best practice guidelines around, for instance, governance of protected areas, guidelines for applying protected area management categories, the IUCN categories 1 through 6, some of our guidelines around effective management, and also some of our other scientific knowledge products, which some of you may be familiar with, such as the IUCN Red List that I'd mentioned, but also other conservation standards such as the Key Biodiversity Area Standard and the Protected Planet database. So we are also hoping to improve the amount of scientific and objectively collected information through the Greenness program that can then contribute to these other knowledge products of ours as well. And I should mention the standard is not meant to only promote IUCN products, but also any other tools and approaches that are being used in jurisdictions that would align with the requirements of the standard are also being used in the Greenness program. So the 17 criteria form the global standard, and that stays stable. It will open up once every 4 years. So the next period that'll be open for public review will be in 2020 at IUCN's World Conservation Congress in June of 2020. But there are indicators that basically indicate the kinds of evidence and information that sites need to provide in order to demonstrate that they're meeting the conditions of the standard. And this screen, sorry if the text is a bit small, but it's just to give you an example of what these indicators look like for one criteria. Typically, there's about three indicators on average for the 17 criteria. So there's about 50 generic indicators. And these indicators are able to be adapted if needed. The indicators are designed to be globally applicable, but in some jurisdictions, we've seen up to 10% of the indicators are adapted to reflect the more local jurisdictional context. And again, this will be explained in further detail in the training. But the idea here is that there's a global standard, and then there's an adaptation mechanism by which that global standard can be made most relevant and applied in a jurisdictional context. So in terms of how the program gets implemented, it starts, there's three, let's say, key phases to it. The first phase is where we are right now with California, and it starts typically with a commitment that comes from a government agency, such as the agencies that are supporting bringing the green list to California here, or it can also be civil society organizations that are supporting protected areas that want to bring the IUCN program and standards and tools to protected areas in their jurisdiction. We then convene local experts to form the expert assessment group for the green list, which is what all of you are part of. And IUCN, along with an accreditation partner, trains the EAGL. And the EAGL is formed under the auspices of the World Commission on Protected Areas that does the final selection, and of which we would encourage all of you to apply to become members of the World Commission on Protected Areas. The second phase is the adaptation. So as part of the training, there's time spent to kick off the adaptation, and that's looking closely at all of the 50 indicators and seeing if they are all equally relevant and applicable in the California context, or if some of them need to be adapted. The adapted indicators will come back to IUCN, to a standards committee that will review the adaptations that have been made, just to make sure that they still maintain the intent of the global standard. And the adapted set of indicators goes through a consultation, and they're then approved for implementation. So the third phase is really the implementation. Once the indicators are adapted, they're then sent to all of the sites. In this case, they would be applied by the entire network of sites that would do a self-assessment first against the foundational components to enter into the application phase. And there are some requirements around stakeholder engagement, and then the sites move through 3 phases in order to get green listed. So the application phase is where sites provide information against the foundational components. That's the first 3 components that I mentioned. That's governance, design and planning, effective management. And then the candidate phase is really where once the sites have provided information against the 3 phases, an EAGL representative just checks that all of the information is there, and then the site is admitted to the candidate phase. And this is where the sites provide information against the 4th component, which is the conditions to meet the demonstration of successful conservation outcomes. There's a stakeholder consultation in this phase, as well as a site visit. And in the context of a network of sites, it's not going to be a site visit for every single site, but it will be site visits for a sample of sites that would be representative of the network. And that's something that will also be discussed in further detail at the training. Once all of this information and the stakeholder consultations have taken and site visit have taken place, the EAGL then meets and will conduct the evaluation, and together assess the information as part of that evaluation. And this happens through an in-person meeting. And the EAGL makes a recommendation whether in their view, the sites are actually meeting the adapted indicators and thereby the global green list standard. So that recommendation will come to an IUCN green list committee, which is the final checkpoint. And generally the green list committee follows the recommendations of the EAGLs, and the sites are then admitted to the IUCN green list. Now the sites get the certification not permanently, because, as I mentioned earlier, we expect that the standard will be raised and will evolve every 4 years. So, and also it's important that we make sure that these sites and the networks of sites are maintaining a high standard of performance. So the certificates or the green list status is valid for a period of 5 years, and there's a midterm check to make sure that conditions haven't changed, and if things have changed on the ground, then there's a couple of years to take corrective action to make changes to maintain the standard, and then there's a 5-year renewal review at the end of the 5-year period, and the site then renews its status for another 5 years. We do set a overall time limit of 5 years from applicants for sites to move from applicant to green list phase. This is to encourage sites to make progress, and also to note that if it does take longer than 5 years for sites to achieve green listing, then there may be other barriers, such as institutional barriers, that are preventing the sites from achieving the standard. It's also important to mention that the green list is a voluntary program, and so sites also choose when they're ready to move from each phase. Based on the pilot phase experience, typically well-managed sites may take up to 6 months and to provide the information and go through this process. Sites that have to take some corrective actions, depending on the number of actions needed, could take up to 1 or 2 years. Then, as I mentioned earlier, also the network application of sites is new, and so we'll have to see what that timeline looks like. Very quickly, I mentioned this. This is the data management system. It's called Compass. It's a cloud-based platform, and we'll get into much more detail and you'll have a much better orientation of it at the training. But just to say that that's the platform through which you'll be evaluating the data. And then I mentioned this is protectedplanet.net. Feel free to have a look at the website, and you can go to the green list section where all of the 25 green list sites from the pilot phase are featured. We also work closely with Protected Planet is a joint platform between IUCN and UN Environment's World Conservation Monitoring Center. So a lot of the information that we're collecting through the Greenness program is also helping to address data gaps in management effectiveness information in some of the global databases that are managed by the UN and IUCN. Very quickly, some of the values we've seen from the Greenness program. It's a new program, and we're still compiling this list. And so feedback from California is also welcome as you go through the program. But as was mentioned also by the state partners, the global recognition for local protection and conserved area success against a benchmark provided by IUCN, being a scientific authority on protected area management and a credible authority on protected area governance and stakeholder engagement. We are also hoping that by joining the Greenness community, it provides access to experts and is able to leverage some of the tools and investments against a global benchmark. So being able to devote financial resources to targeted actions that will improve and result in successful conservation outcomes and better governance. The certification system itself, we expect, is fairly cost effective because we do rely on voluntary experts, and we have the World Commissions of Protected Area support as well. And we are also seeing that sites are giving us feedback around the benefits of the stakeholder consultations, mean that they're engaging more with landscapes and seascapes within which these sites are present. And typically, when sites get awarded green list status, there is some media attention. So these protected areas or networks of protected areas also do get some media attention, and thereby also have some vigilance, so that if things do change on the ground, this can get monitored and attract some attention, particularly in some countries, not the case, countries and jurisdictions, not the case in California, but in other countries where protected areas often can be degazetted or financial resources are reduced for protected areas. And finally, it's a means through which countries can prove that they're contributing to some of the global goals that they are signatories to, such as the CBD, particularly IHC Target 11, but also on SDGs targets 14 and 15. Just by way of wrapping up, I thought I would give you a quick view of the overall governance system of the Green List. I made reference to some of these committees, so maybe I'll just start there on the right-hand side. The IUCN Green List Committee is chaired by the chair of the World Commission on Protected Areas and has about 9 or 10 individuals who are global experts on protected area management effectiveness and governance, and they are the ones that ultimately admit the sites to the Green List. The Green List Committee also is in charge of approving standard versions and the adapted indicators, and in order to do that, they have a standards committee that acts on their behalf, and they're a group of technical specialists on management effectiveness, conservation outcomes, and governance. And they are the guardians of the standard, and they're the ones that will review the adapted indicators closely and will give approval or feedback to the EAGLs. There's a management committee that approves jurisdictions. So California was approved by the last management committee meeting in May. The management committee is in charge of the strategic development of the program and also approves the user manual, which is the operational guidelines for the program. And then there's an operations team, which consists of IUCN country regional offices, IUCN secretariat staff, but also implementing partners such as OPC in this case, who is playing a coordination role in California to implement the Greenness Program in the MPA network. There's an independent assurance provider that makes sure that all of the rules in the user manual are being followed, and that role is provided by a company called Accreditation Services International, and Matt Durnan is the independent reviewer as an example in this situation. And then here on the left-hand side, there's a bunch of acronyms here, sorry, but this is really the Green List community. At the heart of it, of course, is the protected and conserved areas, and we work with the protected and conserved area staff who provide the information and evidence. But the EAGLs are also central to the evaluation, and the implementing partner is central, plays a critical role in terms of coordinating this process and liaising between EAGLs, protected conserved area staff, and the IUCN governance system. And underlying this are some WCPA specialist groups, which are certain thematic groups within the World Commission on Protected Areas that also can support EAGLs or can also be a pool for EAGL members in some jurisdictions. Okay, I'm not going to get into. I covered the 3 key phases. I just thought, and we might explain this a bit more when we meet in the training. But where there's 3 key phases, as I said, and the first phase is really establishing the EAGL in a jurisdiction, and we are right here now at the training and accreditation of EAGL members. So, Mike, I'll just check back with you. That covers the IUCN presentation, and then Matt's going to go into a quick overview of the training. Do we want to take questions here or go to Matt first?
I think, yeah, we don't have anything to add, so I think let's save questions until the end and just bounce it over to Matt now.
Okay, Matt, sound good to you?
Works for me. All right. Hi, everyone. It's Matt Durnan. This will be quick because we're going to get into a lot more detail next week in the workshop. So I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to what you can expect in the workshop coming up. Deb, you've got the slide control, right? So can you just flip to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Sorry, I might stop for a second and just add a little bit more to my introduction. As Dev said, and I said, I'm with Accreditation Services International. I've been working with the Green List, the IUCN Green List, since the inception, prior to the inception, and reviewing, working as the regional reviewer for Asia. So I've been through a lot of these processes with the EAGLs, the adaptation of the various standards that we've had in the past and what we're dealing with now. So I've got a pretty good history and understanding of what's happened in the past and how we are moving forward. So you can look to me just as much as you can look to anyone else on this call, as far as Deb and Mike, for questions that you might have moving forward as you're working as an EAGL. I'm always available to help and answer questions, so keep that in mind as you start doing your work. Okay, Deb, go ahead to the next one. Okay, so I would also just like to add my thank you to you all. This is it's the EAGL is really the linchpin of the entire process. It's the most important group, in that you're adapting the standard to your local jurisdiction and you're reviewing applications of protected areas and ultimately recommending them to the committee for green listing. So you really are the most important player in this whole process. Obviously the protected areas themselves are very important, but they have to go through the EAGL essentially to get green listed. So what we're going to do next week is focus on how you do that, how you work as an EAGL, how you adapt the standard, how you review the protected area applications and the various processes. And this is all laid out in a lot of detail in the user manual. And I believe that everyone should have received links to the user manual and the standard, and it would be very helpful to all of you to try to review as much as you can prior to the workshop. That manual, it will be something that I don't expect you to read it from cover to cover, but it will be something that you'll want to refer to throughout your tenure as an EAGL member. And there's a couple of few chapters and sections that are particularly important for you to look at, and that's the chapters listed here, 2, 3, and chapter 4.7, adapting the indicators, achieving and maintaining IUCN Green List status for protected areas, how that's done, and your actual terms of reference in terms of what you're expected to do as an EAGL member. Okay, next slide, please, Deb. So the objectives really are for the training are quite simple. It's, oh, I apologize for that, Australia. This should be California EAGL. I didn't edit that, obviously. Is to introduce and train you all in the manual and Compass. Compass is the online database that we use to manage this system and to manage applications, and as standards are updated, as applications come in, you and everyone else that's involved with the Green List can go to this database and get that information, access it. You'll learn, I'll be teaching you a little bit about that in the upcoming training, so no need to worry there yet. And then once we get through the training, you're going to actually start doing the adaptation for the standard. And like I said, I've gone through this process now with a lot of EAGLs. The standard has really been reviewed and updated and reviewed and updated and reviewed and updated by the standards committee and a lot of experts from around the globe over the past several years. And I think you'll see when you review it, it's quite a good standard. But each jurisdiction is a little bit different, and therefore there's a need to adapt that standard for each jurisdiction. And so that's one of the biggest responsibilities initially of the EAGL, is to go through that process and adapt that. Having said that, I've seen different EAGLs handle it differently, and in some cases I've seen EAGLs go through the adaptation and really only change one or two not criteria but indicators, and then I've seen others that have done quite a bit of updating of the indicators based on their jurisdiction. So each jurisdiction is different. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I suspect that you'll see that it's a pretty good standard, and there may not be a lot of things that are needed to be changed. However, as mentioned earlier in the call, this is the first network that we're looking at. In the past, it's been individual protected areas, and so that may introduce some complexities to the adaptation of this standard that you might find as you go through it. So we'll just have to see how that goes. With luck, you'll be able to get through the adaptation in terms of your review of it and changes in at most a couple of days. And then once that's done, the standard goes out for a review process, as Dev said, and will go on to the committee ultimately for their green light as far as how the adaptation has been done. So those are the two things that we'll do in the training. Dev sort of went through this in a slide of his own that was slightly different, and we're not going to go into detail here because we will go into detail about these various levels and processes, but this is really just a slide to again emphasize the importance of the EAGL. If you look at this, you'll see that most every step along the way the EAGL is involved, right on through to the ultimate green listing. At each stage, the standard and generic indicators, adaptation stage, the application stage, and the final listing, there is a role for the EAGL. So again, you're critical to this entire process, and it's it's my pleasure to thank you all for doing this, because it is something that is extremely important, and we couldn't do without your expertise. So thank you. And I think I have one last slide, Deb, if you could just. So just again, a quick summary. You have to perform some important roles. That's adapting the generic indicators. You can learn more about that in the manual. Again, that is really something that I hope you'll print out or keep on your computer easily accessible so that you can refer to it often. You're going to evaluate the protected area performance, and again, there's information on the steps that are going to be involved there. And at some point, you may actually have to reevaluate protected areas that have been green listed if there looks like there are some issues with their management or triggers that create non-compliance. And finally, you're going to have to ensure as an EAGL, and you'll probably give this role to one or possibly two members of the EAGL to make sure that Compass is up to date and that you're checking things off as you go through the process. Before your training next week, or at the training, you'll receive a checklist that is sort of a 30,000-foot summary of the things that you will do as an EAGL as you go through the process, and it's a really nice summary of that. So I hope you'll find that useful, and we can talk about that during the training next week. So that's all I wanted to do today, because otherwise we're going to just repeat ourselves over and over, and I don't want to do that at this point. So I'd be happy to answer questions. I know you probably have some questions on what Deb presented earlier, and so we're happy to take those now, unless, Mike, you have other things that you want to throw in first.
No, not at all. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, let's just go ahead and go straight into questions.
This is Hawk Rosales. I have a question regarding a reference earlier to links that were provided to us for the manual and other documents. And I'm wondering if you can reference the specific email in which those links were provided, because I couldn't find them. When I went to the IUCN Greenlist website, I found various versions of the manual and standards and other things. So it can be a little bit disorienting. I'm not sure I've accessed the correct versions of those things. If they haven't been sent out, those links, if you could resend them, that would be very helpful to us.
Yeah, you got it. So Hawk, this is Mike. We actually intentionally did not send the links out at first because we didn't want to overwhelm people with too much information. Some people did inquire and ask for the links specifically, and I sent it to those people that asked, but my plan was to send it out in an email to everybody after this call once you'd sort of been oriented to what those documents were. So I'm going to go ahead and send those out in addition to a finalized training agenda right at the end of this call.
Okay, I guess one of the fundamental concerns I had about that was the agreement, or I'm sorry, the declaration of engagement that we were required to check off and sign and send back to you. That was contained in as an attachment to your letter that you had originally sent out to us, I think on July 18. And that checklist, the first item in there says, I have read and understood the green list standards in associated set of indicators and the green list user manual. So I think we've all checked that off, I believe. And yet we haven't necessarily all read that fully, right?
Yeah, and that's my fault because there's a little bit of a miscommunication between us and IUCN before I sent that out. So really I should have sent them with the declaration so that you guys could have checked that box, you know, and felt comfortable about having actually perused it. But I think the best path forward at this point is just for me to send it out now. If anybody, you know, if anyone's uncomfortable and wants to, you know, revisit that checkbox, that's obviously, you guys are welcome to talk to us about that. But I think that you'll find that there's nothing in those documents that would cause you to revisit that. So I do apologize for that miscommunication. That's on me, but I think we'll get those links out to you and just forge ahead.
Okay.
Actually, thanks for, and Mike, I'll just add, this is Dev. Thanks for flagging that. That is actually a good point. I'm not sure the intent there is that there's a commitment to look at the standard in the user manual. I think Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we would like you to get familiarized with the documents, with the standard in the user manual, but I think be also respectful of EAGL members' time, and the training is really to give you a good orientation of the user manual, and it's more likely that you'll be reading more of the user manual during the training or even after. So it's a good flag for IUCN to also maybe change a bit that language.
I'm sure my colleagues on the call have a number of questions as well, but I wondered if I could just pass by two other important questions at this time that are brief. The first is confidentiality and the level of protection for information during our discussions, deliberations, documents, data, whatever that we provide and exchange. Can you describe briefly what that should look like and what sort of conversations we might be able to have during this process with our colleagues who we work closely with on number of levels with regard to marine protected areas. In other words, are there areas of these discussions or any documents that we should not discuss? I suppose you can get into that more at the training, but can you give us just a brief idea of what that might look like with regard to confidentiality and protected information, if there is any concern about those things?
I will just say that from the state's perspective, we want this process to be as open and transparent as possible. So as far as we're concerned, there's nothing that would be off the table for discussion. We want you guys to be representatives of your particular stakeholder groups. So everything that happens at the trainings and everything that you do as part of this process, we want you guys to be discussing that with your networks. But I think, so that's the state's perspective. But Matt, do you have anything to add on that from previous green list jurisdictions? Did this come up at all?
Well, I think there's sort of two levels of that to that question. So I agree with what you just said completely. Everything is open for discussion. When I'm acting as a reviewer, listening in on adaptation of standards and review of protected area applications, I want to see that there's a lot of participation, and everyone that has comments and opinions is allowed to express them, and that those are recognized by the chair and everyone else, and so on and so forth. And when those meetings are taking place, there should be somebody taking notes so that information is recorded, so it's there for the record. Now, having said that about the record, and Dev can probably comment a little bit more with a little bit more detail on this, that stuff will go up on Compass, but Compass is not something that's accessible by the general public. It's accessible only by you as EAGL members, me as a reviewer, other people that are participating in the green list, and it's also based on jurisdiction. So, the Italian EAGL wouldn't be able to access the California EAGL information, for example. And there are then within Compass other levels. So I have a certain access to information that some people don't. The committee has, yet again, a different access to a broader amount of information. And the real purpose there is that we want this, think of it as it's a record that can be accessed by the people that need to access it at some point, and does provide that transparency and legitimacy to the whole process, but obviously with care in terms of organizational reputations, and making sure that people feel free to have open and honest discussions during these standard adaptations, as well as the review of protected areas. I hope that helps. And Deb, you may have something you want to add there as well.
Yeah, I can just quickly add that absolutely it's transparency, and we will, but there's two levels in that when sites get green listed, there will be a kind of a public summary of why these sites get green listed. But and then the evaluation meetings will have minutes, but that's not expected to be public, because we want these evaluations to be trusted spaces for all of the difficult questions to be asked. And if there's anything that's confidential there, then that can be flagged. And as Matt said, the information in Compass is available only to the jurisdictions, and that's not expected to be publicly accessible. But it's important for transparency that we have records of things, and in certain situations, if there's absolutely confidential information, then that we can mark that as confidential, and it will remain as such in Compass in the system.
So yeah, Dev, just going off what you just said, I also wanted to flag for our EAGL members who are representing California's tribes and tribal governments in particular, to let us know if there's something, for example, about historical use that you guys would prefer not to be widely shared. Just flag it, and we'll keep it private.
There was also a mention that our CVs, a distilled version of our CVs, will be posted. And has that occurred yet? And if it has not occurred, or even if it has occurred, will we have the opportunity to approve that and have them revised accordingly if we see that needs to occur before they're posted or reposted?
At this point, the only thing that we have posted is just the names of the EAGL members. We didn't even post affiliations. We have no plans to post CVs. I'm not sure if that was maybe an IUCN communication, but the state has no plans to post anything other than the names.
Oh, we were told that our full CVs would not be posted. However, that there would be a distilled version that would be made public. So I don't recall what email particularly that was in, but I read that recently in one of the emails from one of you.
Yeah, it's actually in the declaration. It's consenting to your CV being added on Compass, so it's not publicly available, and it's a summary of the CV in Compass. So yeah, think of Compass really as Compass is not publicly accessible. We issue user accounts for anyone to access Compass, and it's based on a jurisdictional basis. And I think the idea here was to provide a summary of expertise for other EAGL members to be able to reference if they wanted to see what kind of expertise one of their fellow EAGL members in a jurisdiction has. I think that's really the intent, but I'm not even sure, Matt. I don't know if you know if they're using. I don't think we're actually doing this in Australia, for example.
No, I mean no, we're not. I mean, what the Compass, each EAGL member is required to upload their letter of interest, their CV, and the declaration. Those are the 3 documents that need to go up on Compass. We've not done summaries of individual EAGL members' CVs and then posted those on public sites or even anywhere on Compass so that people could review a summarized version. I think the assumption is if individual EAGL members want to find out more background on another EAGL member, they'll just go to Compass and look at their CV. So I don't think there's no requirement that I have of people creating summary CVs. That's just extra work that's unnecessary from my perspective.
Right, thank you.
Excuse me, this is Dick Ogg, and I'm the commercial representative, commercial fishing representative. I had a question. I'm in the middle of fishing right now, but I just had a question regarding the if I have constituents that ask questions regarding this, am I not supposed to elaborate on what's going on and how we're determining things, and are we supposed to keep this fairly, within the group? Is that something that I can ask? I'm sorry to interrupt.
I think it was a bit. I think I was able to figure out that question. I think the question was whether you can discuss this with your constituency stakeholder group, and in my view, absolutely you can. It's not the. It's absolutely meant to engage with various stakeholders. In fact, in each of the phases, both in the applicant phase and in the candidacy phase, there are requirements to engage with stakeholders that are not just stakeholders represented through the EAGL members, but actually for the sites to have public stakeholder consultation fora, and those will often be public, and these are opportunities for EAGL members to also invite other individuals from their stakeholder constituency to provide input to those fora, and that's why, as we say, as a voice of that stakeholder, you can definitely engage and be absolutely open and transparent about this. Matt, you may have something to add to that. But.
Yeah, I might just add to that and just say I think there's sort of two levels again to that. So I agree 100% with Deb that, first of all, there are numerous points along the process to engage, specifically with stakeholders, purposefully with stakeholders. But you as EAGL members, anytime somebody has a question about what's happening, what is this whole green list, how does the process work, you should feel absolutely free to discuss that. That's the whole point of the transparency here, is we want people to understand what's happening. I think where you need to potentially be careful is when it comes to specifics of your individual EAGL meetings. We certainly wouldn't want, one EAGL member saying to the, stakeholders, oh, it was Joe Schmo, who's also on the EAGL, who disagrees with this. At that point, I think you need to use your professional, and ethical judgment to understand what it means to communicate with stakeholders about the process more broadly and more specifically or more broadly. So again, I think there's sort of two levels to that. We want people to understand what's going on, so that there isn't, any big question of why California is going through this green list process. What's the green list about? How does it actually work, etc. But those meetings that you have and specific details that happen in those discussions, there may be, several things that you wouldn't want to necessarily be speaking to the general public about.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I know that there's going to come up from our, the commercial fishing industry, a number of different questions regarding the impact of the NPAs and so on and so forth, and that I hear that quite frequently, and so how I respond and everything, I just want to be sure that I support the group and that I'm also being very transparent and making sure that the commercial fleet understands the process and where we're going with it and so on and so forth. So that's basically why I asked the question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, sorry, Tom. Just on that point, I think there would be. I think there. Just to reiterate that there will be opportunities for stakeholders to engage in the process at specific points, and if you do feel there are specific stakeholders that you'd like to invite to those consultation sessions, then that's where that can be done. Sorry, Tova, I cut you off.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you, Dick, for coming onto the phone. I think you're out at sea right now, so thanks for your dedication.
I am out at sea, yes.
So this is Steve Murray. I have a quick question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you.
So it was mentioned a couple of times in the webinar that this is the first network that is going to be examined through this process, and then I take it that most of the prior assessments have been for individual sites. And then a little later on, it was said that with regard to adapting some of the global criteria or indicators, that we may have to look at those in the context of the network, which is new, as I take it from what has been said. So I have just a couple of questions related to that. The first is, would you like to make any comments about how you see a whole network with an array of sites fitting into this process? And secondly, would it be possible before the workshop to get an actual sample of a global indicator that has been adapted so we could kind of get an idea of what the adaptation looks like?
Yeah, okay. So on the first question, what we've started to discuss a bit on the IUCN side and also with OPC and Fish and Wildlife is the components that could be applicable to entire network of sites could be ones related to governance, design and planning, for instance, or even as far as effective management, because a lot of the information often for those criteria is in a management plan and is in other documentation and even some monitoring systems that are supporting the implementation of a management plan. Where there could be differentiation for sites or a sub-network or a cluster of sites could be around the criteria 3.7 and then the component 4 conservation outcomes. This is where the standard requires that certain performance indicators are identified, that there's certain baselines for whether, depending on the ecosystem, for certain indicator species. And this is where there could be some differentiation based on a site or a grouping of sites. And what we will do on the morning of the second day of the training is actually have once the EAGL has a full understanding of the processes, and before getting into the actual indicator adaptation, we will make some time for discussion of what a network approach needs to consider. And so that actually might be the space where we could also show you a sample of what an adapted indicator looks like at the start of the second day. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I don't think I need to add anything there, but I think if people want something before, we could probably dig something up to send before as well, but certainly we can show examples of adapted indicators at the workshop.
Yeah. To follow up on what Jim just said, this is Hawk. I also would suggest that we look at the concept of cultural landscapes with regard to how that may help us tie together these individual sites that are all up and down the California coast, these individual MPAs. Because the idea of cultural landscapes, which is found in both, I believe in both federal, certainly in federal and in state law, or in cultural resource management, and I think there are legal definitions to it as well. Cultural landscapes allows large areas to be identified in which there are critical cultural and ecological features and systems that are linked together over large geographic areas that are together considered to be part of a larger picture. So I think that may be one aspect that may help us to look at and be able to evaluate or consider the larger area of all of these MPAs together. I think there are 124 of them. And certainly cultural landscape, the concept of cultural landscapes may be able to play a role in it.
Yeah, thanks for there's also cultural landscapes, I believe, under the World Heritage Convention as well. So I think it's good to perhaps bring some of these examples and some of these references up in the particularly when we discuss the network approach in the training on the second day, because that's really when we will need to discuss what the design process would, where we design the process of evaluating a network. So I think having some references there would be very useful. Thanks.
All right, thanks for that, Hawk. That was a great point. Do we have any other questions from EAGL members?
Yeah, this is Russ Mall from San Diego, and I'm just wondering, after we've taken all the time, very much appreciated, to train us as EAGL members, is there ever any carryover of membership from one EAGL to the next?
Typically, the EAGL members commit to a 2-year term, and when we establish an EAGL in a jurisdiction, there's a few initial sites that make commitments, and then we see then more sites commit to the green list, and the EAGL actually is active over time. In the case of an MPA network, we'll have to see whether the MPA network engaging with the Greenness program will inspire other parks in California to get interested and make commitments to the Greenness program. So we would hope that the EAGL itself could also evolve into being more than just a marine protected area EAGL at some time down the road, and we're hoping that this engagement will be over a longer term, but that's to be seen. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, I think at this point, we'd like to just turn it over if anybody has specific questions regarding logistics or other questions specifically regarding the training next week.
There is the item of homework that's listed in this draft agenda. How much homework do you anticipate we would have after these 2 full days of, well, I guess it would be on the first night? Is there going to be, can you estimate the amount of hours or time that we would be expected on that first night to be devoting to our homework assignment?
The only thing that we had meant by homework was just once we email those PDF links out today, to have you guys take the time to peruse them if you haven't already, and maybe think about any questions you may have to bring up during the in-person training. But unless Matt has anything else in mind for that first night, I believe that was all that was intended by that.
There's a questionnaire that goes out that should go with that email that you send, Mike. I think I forwarded that to you.
Yeah, I'm going to send that out today.
Yeah, and that's the homework. So that should be done. But you're not turning that in. This is just to get you to try to think about the manual, look at the manual, and go through this questions. I don't remember how many there are, but there's not a lot. Familiarize yourself with the manual. We'll go over those questions in the actual training. It's always nice to have some EAGL members that can answer the questions when I ask them.
Okay, guys, so you should look in your inbox today for an updated agenda with, in addition to all the information that you already saw. Going to have some like information on little various restaurants and shops and things in Sacramento, because we're going to only have one group dinner. The group dinner on Tuesday night, since everybody's arriving at different times, we decided not to do that, and we're going to have a group dinner on Wednesday night instead. So we'll have some options available for you in the email that I send today. I'll also make sure that I send those PDF links so that everybody has them, as well as the questionnaire that Matt was just talking about. So look for that today. And is there anything else that anybody has questions on? Any issues, concerns?
Hey, this is Matt. Matt Bracken. I was just wondering, in the materials it said that the hotel and the meeting location are about a mile apart. Is that readily walkable, or is there some sort of coordinated transportation to get from one to the other?
We're not doing coordinated transportation. It is readily walkable, but also if you don't feel like walking that mile, then there's plenty of Lyft and Uber taxi transportation as well. And just a reminder that all of your travel expenses, so things like taxis or whatever, are going to be reimbursed. And food as well.
Hi, this is Suzanne from Bodega. I'm just wondering if there's easy parking at the RLF office.
There is a parking lot nearby. It's not attached to the building, I don't believe, but we will send that information out with the PDF package that we will be sending you today.
The building does actually have a parking lot, but I'm not sure what it's. I mean, it's a multi-level parking lot within the same building of RLF, but I'm not sure what. I mean, they used to allow people to use it and just. I think it's a paid parking lot within the same building, but there's also one next door, and there are many in the area as well.
All right. Well, it sounds like that would wrap it up for everyone's questions. So just again, we want to thank you for your time, and we really look forward to being in the same room as you all next week and getting to know you all more on an individual level, as well as going through this IUCN Greenlist process.
All right, I think that's it. Thanks, everybody. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with me or Tova if you have any other questions. Look for an email from us today. And yeah, we look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Thanks, everyone, from the IUCN.
All right.
Thanks
all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.